The evening was calm, and the restaurant was filled with the soft sound of clinking glasses and quiet conversations. The kind of place where people came to enjoy a meal without rushing, where the lights were warm and golden, and the music in the background was gentle, almost like a whisper. Eleanor Whitmore, known to most people in town as a billionaire widow with an elegant charm, sat alone at her table near the large window. She had chosen that seat because she loved to watch the city lights. Outside, it gave her comfort, a reminder that life was still moving even though she sometimes felt stuck in the past. She wore her usual pearls, a soft cream-colored shawl over her shoulders, and her eyes carried the grace of someone who had lived long enough to know both joy and sorrow. Eleanor had been married to Charles Whitmore, a powerful businessman who had built their empire brick by brick. Their love story was whispered about in magazines and among high society. People adored the way Charles would look at her even after decades of marriage, like she was the only woman in the room. When he passed away 10 years ago, Eleanor felt as if half her soul had been buried with him. She carried herself with dignity, but behind her calm smile was a heart that still longed for the warmth of the life she once had. She rarely went out alone, but tonight she wanted a quiet dinner. Perhaps some roasted duck and a glass of red wine, something to remind her of the meals she and Charles used to share. As she glanced at the menu, she noticed the waitstaff moving between the tables, balancing trays and smiling at customers. Nothing unusual at first, until one young waitress stepped forward to serve her water. Eleanor looked up politely, prepared to give a soft nod of thanks, but her eyes froze mid-glance. The glass in her hand trembled slightly, her breath caught in her chest. Because hanging from the waitress's neck was something Eleanor thought she would never see again. The wedding necklace. The one Charles had given her on their wedding day. The one that had vanished from her life many years ago. The necklace wasn't just expensive jewelry, it was one of a kind. A golden chain with a delicate heart-shaped pendant encrusted with diamonds. And in the center sat a rare sapphire, deep blue like the ocean. It had been custom-made, designed especially for Eleanor. Charles had whispered to her on their wedding day that the blue stone reminded him of her eyes. Every time she wore it, she felt like she carried a piece of their love around her neck. It wasn't just wealth. It was a memory, a promise, and a bond that could not be replaced. But it had been stolen, lost during a burglary at their estate. Despite investigations, despite rewards offered, it was never found, and Eleanor had wept for it, not because of its price, but because of the love it symbolized. Now here it was, glowing under the soft lights of the restaurant, worn casually by a young woman who looked no older than her mid-20s, her hair tied back, her uniform neat, her hands graceful as she poured the water without noticing the shock on Eleanor's face. Eleanor's heart began to pound. Her mind was racing with questions. How could this be possible? Was it a copy? No, she knew every detail of that necklace, every curve, every sparkle of the stones. It was hers. There was no doubt. For a moment, she felt anger rising in her chest, the thought that someone could be wearing something so precious to her, something that was stolen. But then, as she looked closely at the waitress, she saw innocence. The young woman's eyes were kind, her smile genuine. There was no hint of arrogance or deceit. She wore the necklace as though it had always belonged to her, as though it was part of her life story. Eleanor felt her anger dissolve into confusion and curiosity. Maybe there was more to this than she understood. She sat still, her fork untouched, pretending to read the menu while secretly watching the waitress move around the tables. She noticed the way other customers smiled at her, how she carried herself with politeness, how she leaned down to listen carefully when someone spoke to her. She wasn't just another worker going through the motions. There was something warm about her, something that reminded Eleanor of her younger self. Maybe it was the way she tilted her head when she smiled. Maybe it was the spark in her eyes, but it felt strangely familiar. Eleanor tried to focus on her food order, but her mind was consumed by the necklace. Memories flooded back of the night it disappeared. The police lights outside her mansion. The chaos of officers moving in and out. Her trembling hands as she explained to them that the necklace wasn't just jewelry. It was part of her heart. She remembered how Charles had held her that night, assuring her that it was only an object, but she knew he was just trying to soothe her. He too felt the loss, and now, decades later, to see it again, not in a museum, not in an auction, but here, on the neck of a humble waitress, it felt like destiny was playing a cruel trick. Eleanor's lips trembled. She wanted to ask immediately, to demand an explanation, but she held herself back. She was a woman of grace, and she would not make a scene. Instead, She decided she would watch, she would learn more, she would understand before she acted. Still, she could not take her eyes off the necklace. The sapphire shimmered every time the light caught it, just as it once shimmered when Charles had fastened it around her neck on their wedding night. Her chest ached with both nostalgia and confusion. The dinner that was supposed to be a peaceful evening turned into a storm of emotions. Eleanor found herself gripping her napkin tightly, her mind traveling between past and present, between love and loss, between disbelief and curiosity. She did not know what the night would bring, but she knew one thing with certainty. This was not a coincidence. Life had placed this necklace in front of her again for a reason, and she was determined to find out why. Eleanor sat in the restaurant with her heart still racing. The image of the necklace shining under the dim light would not leave her mind. She could almost feel the weight of it against her own skin as if the years had not passed, and the memories it carried began to rush back into her like waves crashing on a shore. She had once believed she had let go, but now, with just one glance at the waitress, everything had returned, sharp and alive, and she could not ignore it. She remembered the day Charles gave her the necklace. It was their wedding day, a warm afternoon filled with laughter, music, and promises. Charles had always been a man of grand gestures, but this one had taken her breath away. In the quiet of the evening, after the guests had gone and the music had faded, he brought out a small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly though he was a man known for confidence and power. When she opened it, she gasped. Inside was the most beautiful necklace she had ever seen, a delicate chain of gold, a heart-shaped pendant sparkling with diamonds, and in the middle, a rare sapphire so deep and blue it seemed to hold the entire ocean inside. Charles had said softly, "This will rest close to your heart, just as I will, for as long as I live." Eleanor had cried that night, not out of sadness but out of joy so pure it could never be forgotten. From that moment on, the necklace was more than jewelry, it was a part of her. She wore it to every important event, to every anniversary dinner, to every gala where people admired her grace, and even in private moments when she wanted to feel close to Charles. The necklace became her silent companion, a reminder of a love story that others envied but only they truly understood. It was not about wealth, though they had plenty. It was about meaning, about love turned into something tangible, something she could touch whenever she needed to remind herself that she was not alone. But the memory of that love was also tied to a memory of loss. Eleanor could still feel the chill of the night when everything changed. Years ago, their estate had been broken into, thieves had slipped past security, and though many valuable things were taken, it was the necklace that shattered Eleanor's heart. She had walked into her dressing room to find her jewelry box open, the velvet lining empty where the necklace had once been. She had screamed. Charles had come running, and the sight of his wife collapsed on the floor holding an empty box was something he never forgot either. They called the police. There were lights flashing, detectives questioning, servants whispering. But no one could bring the necklace back. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, until finally the case went cold. The necklace was gone. Eleanor had tried to move on. Charles comforted her, reminding her that the true gift was their love, not the object, and while she agreed, part of her heart always ached. Sometimes she would touch her neck in the mirror, forgetting for a moment that the necklace was no longer there. Other times she would dream of it, waking up with tears on her pillow. To others it was just a missing jewel, but to her it was like a piece of her soul had been stolen, and the wound never fully healed. Now, seeing it again on the neck of a stranger, all those memories poured back like floodwater breaking a dam. She could almost hear Charles's voice in her ears, see his smile, feel his hands fastening the chain around her. The blue sapphire glowing in candlelight. She remembered the way people admired it at a charity ball. The way her friends whispered with envy but also respect. Everyone knew that necklace was special, one of a kind, designed just for her. There was no way another could exist. She knew every curve, every stone, every reflection of light. And there it was again, mocking her, teasing her, demanding her to uncover the truth. As she stared at the young waitress, Eleanor wondered what story could possibly explain this. Did the girl know what she was wearing? Did she understand its history? Did she realize it once belonged to a woman who had loved and lost? Or was it simply to her just another necklace, something handed down or bought without thought? Eleanor could not imagine such innocence tied to such a powerful memory, yet the girl wore it so naturally, as if it had been hers forever, and that confused Eleanor even more. Her mind wandered to Charles again. She thought of the man who had given her that necklace, of his deep voice, his gentle yet firm hand. the way he always wanted to protect her. She wondered if somehow fate had placed this necklace back in her path. Perhaps Charles was sending her a message. Perhaps the universe had decided the story was not finished. She could not be sure, but she knew one thing: the necklace was not a coincidence, and she would not rest until she understood its journey. Eleanor thought of the years without it, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the lonely nights she spent staring at the stars, wishing Charles was still beside her. The necklace had been her companion through happiness, and when it was taken, it felt as though her joy had been robbed too. But she had carried on. She had raised children, built charities, expanded her late husband's empire. She had lived with dignity. But the empty space around her neck always whispered of something missing. And now, here it was, daring her to reach out, daring her to question, daring her to uncover secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to face. The restaurant's soft chatter faded into the background as Eleanor sat lost in her thoughts. She barely touched her food. Her hands rested on her lap as her mind replayed decades of memories. She felt both fragile and strong. Fragile because the sight of the necklace opened old wounds. Strong because she knew she had survived. But now a new fire burned inside her, a determination. She was no longer simply a grandmother enjoying dinner. She was a woman who had been handed a mystery. A woman who would not walk away until she uncovered the truth behind the sapphire pendant that had once symbolized the happiest day of her life. Eleanor sat at the table trying to calm her racing heart. But her eyes kept drifting toward the young waitress. Every time the girl passed by carrying a tray of food or filling glasses, the necklace swung gently against her chest, catching the light, sending a shimmer across the room that pierced straight into Eleanor's soul. She wanted to look away. She wanted to act normal, but she couldn't. It was like the necklace had locked her in a spell, pulling her deeper into questions she didn't have answers for. She tried to remind herself to breathe, to focus on her meal, but the roasted duck in front of her tasted of nothing. Her glass of wine remained untouched. She was no longer a woman enjoying dinner. She was a woman caught between the past and the present, between the memory of her late husband and the reality of this young waitress who unknowingly carried a piece of Eleanor's lost life. Her hands shook slightly as she dabbed her lips with a napkin. She hoped no one else noticed her trembling. Outwardly she appeared calm, but inside she was restless. The longer she sat there, the more her curiosity grew into tension. Eleanor began to study the waitress closely, not just the necklace but the girl herself. She noticed her gentle way of speaking to customers, her polite smile, the way she leaned slightly forward to listen when someone spoke. It wasn't fake. It wasn't the kind of smile people put on when they worked for tips. It was genuine. And something about that made Eleanor hesitate. The girl did not look like a thief. She did not act like someone who wore stolen jewels. She carried herself with simplicity, almost as if she didn't even realize the value of the piece she was wearing. But Eleanor's heart still pounded with suspicion. She had lived long enough to know that appearances could deceive. What if the girl had bought it from someone who knew it was stolen? What if she had found it in some dark corner of a pawn shop? What if she was pretending to be innocent? Eleanor's mind twisted between trust and doubt, between kindness and suspicion, and the weight of not knowing was unbearable. She considered her options. Part of her wanted to stand up immediately, to demand the truth, to shout across the restaurant, "Where did you get that necklace?" She wanted to grab it, to hold it in her own hands, to confirm it was real. But another part of her stopped her. She was Eleanor Whitmore, a woman of grace, a woman known for her dignity. She could not risk causing a scene in a public place. She could not humiliate a young woman who might be completely innocent. So she held herself back, biting down on her lip, her mind racing for another way. That was when she thought of the manager. Perhaps she could speak privately. Perhaps she could ask his name. Learn more about the waitress without drawing attention. It seemed safer, calmer. But even then her chest tightened with nerves. What if the waitress noticed her staring? What if the girl felt cornered? Eleanor didn't want to frighten her. She only wanted the truth. Still, the tension was growing. And Eleanor knew she could not leave the restaurant without finding out something. The thought of walking away and never knowing the story behind the necklace felt impossible. The waitress returned to refill Eleanor's water glass, her smile soft, her hands steady. Eleanor lifted her eyes and forced herself to say something. "That is a very beautiful necklace you're wearing." Her voice was gentle, but she felt her throat tighten. The girl looked down for a second, her hand brushing against the pendant as if it were a natural habit. And she said with a warm smile, "Thank you, it was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed away." Her tone was simple, almost casual. She did not seem to know how much weight those words carried. But to Eleanor they struck like thunder. Her heart froze, her body stiffened, her mind screamed with questions. If the necklace had been stolen, how could this girl's mother have owned it? How could a piece that once belonged to Eleanor have found its way into another woman's life? The explanation made no sense, and yet the girl had spoken without hesitation, without guilt. As if she truly believed it was a family heirloom, Eleanor nodded politely, forcing a small smile. Hiding the storm inside her chest, she whispered a soft "I see." But her heart was trembling violently. The rest of the meal blurred around her, voices in the restaurant became distant. The clatter of cutlery faded into silence. Eleanor's mind was consumed by the puzzle in front of her. She couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. She couldn't tell herself it was just a similar necklace. She knew the truth in her bones. This was hers, and now the mystery was deeper, because the girl's story suggested something far more complicated than a simple theft. It suggested history. It suggested secrets. It suggested connections Eleanor had not yet imagined. She excused herself from the table earlier than planned, leaving her meal unfinished. As she stood, her shawl slipping slightly from her shoulders, she turned one last time to watch the girl. The necklace glimmered again, and Eleanor felt the spark of determination light up inside her. This was no longer just curiosity. It was a mission. She would not sleep. She would not rest until she uncovered how that necklace had left her possession and ended up around the neck of this innocent-looking waitress. She walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, her breath sharp, her steps slow but steady. She knew that what began as an ordinary dinner had just turned into the beginning of a mystery that would change her life forever. Eleanor stepped into the night air after leaving the restaurant. But her heart would not let her walk away. She paced slowly along the sidewalk, the glow of the street lamps brushing against her face. Her mind caught in a storm of questions. She had seen her necklace, she had heard the waitress call it her mother's gift, and nothing about it made sense. Every step Eleanor took only pulled her deeper into confusion. She knew she could not leave this story unfinished. Something inside her whispered that the truth was closer than she thought, and she would find it, no matter how uncomfortable it made her. The next evening Eleanor returned to the same restaurant, this time with a plan. She dressed elegantly but kept her jewelry simple, nothing that would draw attention. Her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes sharp though her smile remained soft. She had lived her whole life in circles where appearance mattered. She knew how to blend composure with curiosity. She asked for the same table by the window, pretending she enjoyed the view. But in truth she wanted the waitress to serve her. Again, she needed another chance to look into her eyes, to hear her voice, to get closer to the necklace. The young waitress, whose name Eleanor soon learned was Lily, walked over with the same graceful manners, her hair tied back neatly, her smile carrying no weight of secrets, at least none that Eleanor could see. When Lily placed the menu down, Eleanor looked straight at her, her voice calm. "Would you sit with me for a moment after your shift, dear? I would love to speak with you." Lily hesitated, slightly surprised. But something about Eleanor's presence was hard to refuse. She nodded politely, and said she would. Throughout the meal Eleanor watched her closely, noticing every gesture, every time Lily touched the necklace as if it was her comfort. A habit born from years of wearing it. Eleanor tried to eat, but her appetite was gone. Her mind was restless. When Lily finally returned to say her shift would end in a little while, Eleanor felt both anxious and relieved. She agreed to wait at the small cafe across the street. The cafe was quiet, filled with the smell of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries. Eleanor chose a corner table, her hands resting on a porcelain cup of tea she hardly sipped. She rehearsed in her mind how to ask the questions without frightening the girl. She wanted honesty, but she did not want to accuse. She wanted truth, but she did not want tears. She had to be careful, because something told her this necklace was tied to a story far bigger than theft. At last Lily walked in, still in her work uniform, looking a little shy. She slid into the seat across from Eleanor, her hands folded nervously on the table. Eleanor gave her a kind smile, one that held both gentleness and curiosity. "Thank you for meeting me, dear," she began softly. "I couldn't help but notice your necklace. It is very unique. May I ask about it?" Lily's hand instinctively rose to the pendant, her fingers brushing over the sapphire. Her eyes softened with memory. "It was my mother's," she said again. "She wore it every day. Before she passed away she gave it to me. She told me it was special, that it meant strength, love, and survival." Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were sincere. Eleanor's heart thumped painfully. She leaned forward, whispering, "Did she ever tell you where she got it?" Lily shook her head slowly, her eyes gazing down at the table. "No, she never explained. I asked once, but she smiled and said some things are too painful to talk about. So I never asked again. I just accepted it as hers, and now mine." Her voice cracked with emotion. Eleanor felt the sting of tears press at her eyes, her mind swirling, the pieces of the puzzle becoming even more tangled. She stared at Lily for a long moment, studying her face, her features, her innocence. There was something strangely familiar in her expression, something Eleanor couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was the shape of her eyes, or the way she smiled with quiet humility. She couldn't tell. But her instincts whispered there was more connecting them than just the necklace. Her chest ached with a mixture of fear and hope. She wanted to push further, but she hesitated, afraid of what truth might surface. Instead, Eleanor softened her tone. "It must be very dear to you." Lily nodded quickly. "Yes, it's the only thing I have left of her. Whenever I wear it, I feel like she's still with me, guiding me." Her words struck Eleanor deeply, for that was exactly how she herself once felt with the necklace, as if her husband's love still lived through it. For a brief moment, the two women, from two very different worlds, shared the same silent bond over the same piece of jewelry, though their stories of it were so different. Eleanor wanted to scream the truth, to tell Lily that necklace had once been hers, that it belonged to her family, that it was stolen. But the kindness in Lily's eyes held her back. She couldn't wound the girl without proof. She couldn't crush the only memory she had of her late mother. So Eleanor kept her composure, sipping her tea slowly though her throat felt dry. She decided she needed another way to learn the truth, quietly, carefully, without breaking this fragile trust. When they parted that evening, Eleanor walked back to her car with heavy steps, the night air cool against her cheeks, her heart torn between compassion and suspicion. She now knew the necklace had not simply been stolen and sold. It carried with it a personal story, one tied to Lily's late mother, one full of secrets Eleanor had yet to uncover. She slid into the back seat of her car and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." Her driver glanced at her in the mirror but said nothing. And Eleanor sat in silence, her fingers trembling as she thought of her husband, of betrayal, of mystery, and of a young woman whose life was somehow intertwined with hers in ways she could not yet explain. That night Eleanor could not sleep. She lay awake in her grand mansion, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Lily had said, every smile, every tear. The necklace shining in her mind's eye. The truth was close, she could feel it. But she also felt fear, for she knew that when the truth finally revealed itself, it would not only shock her, it would change everything. For both of them, Eleanor woke up the next morning with the weight of unanswered questions pressing on her chest. She sat by the large window of her mansion, the sunlight spilling across the room, but she felt no warmth. Her mind kept replaying the words Lily had spoken the night before, the way she touched the necklace with such tenderness, the way she said it was her mother's. Eleanor could not shake the feeling that this story was far deeper than a simple theft. There was history hidden behind the sapphire stone, and she was determined to find it. Her thoughts drifted back to Lily's quiet eyes, so filled with innocence. She did not look like a liar. She did not act like someone who had stolen a priceless jewel. She spoke with sincerity, and that sincerity made Eleanor's curiosity burn even brighter. She wanted to know who Lily's mother was, what kind of woman she had been, and how on earth she came to possess the necklace Charles had once placed around Eleanor's own neck with love and devotion. There was no peace in not knowing. Eleanor knew herself well. She would never let go of this mystery. Later that afternoon, Eleanor called her driver and asked to be taken back to the little cafe where she had spoken with Lily. This time, she hoped to speak longer, to dig a little deeper, and perhaps gain a clearer picture of the girl's past. She ordered tea and waited, her fingers drumming softly against the cup, her heart anxious. When Lily arrived after her shift, she looked surprised but also happy to see Eleanor again. She sat down across from her, folding her hands neatly on the table as if she were about to be tested. Eleanor gave her a warm smile to ease the tension. "I hope you don't mind, dear, but I wanted to hear more about you, about your family. You see, you remind me of someone I once knew." Her words were gentle but her eyes searched every expression on Lily's face. Lily hesitated at first, but the calm presence of the older woman encouraged her. She nodded slowly. "There isn't much to tell. I grew up with just my mother. She was everything to me. She worked very hard, sometimes 2 jobs, just to keep food on the table. We never had much. But she always made me feel loved. She always said that love is more valuable than money. I believed her. Her eyes softened with the memory, and she smiled faintly. She never talked much about her past, though. Sometimes I felt like she was hiding something. But I never pressed her. I didn't want to make her sad. Eleanor leaned forward, her heart tightening. And the necklace, she never explained it. Lily shook her head again, her fingers brushing against the pendant. No, never, only that it was important. She wore it every day, even when she was sick. It was like a part of her. When she gave it to me, she said it would protect me, that whenever I felt lost, I should hold it and remember I am strong. Her voice broke slightly, and she looked down. When she passed away, this necklace became the only piece of her I could keep close. Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. She could almost see the shadow of another woman holding the same necklace, cherishing it with the same devotion she once had. The idea that Charles might have given it to someone else, the idea that he might have lived a secret life, began to form in her mind. But she was not ready to accept it. Not yet. It was too painful, too heavy. Instead she pressed softly, "What was your mother's name, dear?" Lily looked up, her eyes glistening. Her name was Margaret. The name rolled off her tongue gently, but for Eleanor it felt like a stone dropped into her chest. She had heard that name before, long ago, whispered in a moment of argument with Charles. A name that had caused a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. She had pushed it aside back then, convincing herself it was nothing. But now, hearing it again, tied to this girl and to the necklace, Eleanor felt a shiver crawl up her spine. She kept her composure, nodding as though the name meant nothing, but inside, her world began to tilt. Margaret, Lily's mother, had clearly been more than just a stranger. Eleanor's instincts screamed that there was a connection between Charles and this woman. A connection Eleanor had never known about. Her mind battled between denial and the need for truth. Her elegant smile remained, but her heart was breaking quietly. The cafe around them buzzed with life, people laughing, spoons clinking, but Eleanor heard nothing. She was trapped inside the story that was slowly unfolding in front of her. She studied Lily again, the softness of her features, the honesty in her tone, and she wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, there was more than jewelry tying them together. Could blood connect them? Could this young woman be more than a stranger? Eleanor's hands trembled slightly against her teacup. Not wanting to alarm Lily, Eleanor steered the conversation back to lighter memories. She asked about her childhood, her dreams, her work at the restaurant. Lily spoke openly now, her trust slowly growing. She told Eleanor about the nights her mother read stories to her, about how she always wanted to study more but couldn't afford college, about how she worked hard now just to survive. Her words painted a picture of a life filled with struggle but also with resilience. Eleanor's chest ached as she listened. Her wealth had sheltered her from such hardships. But here was a girl with so little, holding on to the same necklace that once symbolized the height of Eleanor's happiness. As they parted that day, Eleanor hugged Lily gently, her eyes misty. Lily seemed surprised but grateful for the kindness. When Eleanor returned to her car, she sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window, the name Margaret echoing in her head, the necklace sparkling in her memory. She could no longer dismiss her suspicions. She needed answers, and she knew she could not ask Lily for them directly. Not yet. It would only confuse and hurt her. Instead, Eleanor resolved to dig into the past herself, to uncover what had been hidden, no matter how painful the truth might be. That night, in the quiet of her mansion, Eleanor picked up her phone and called a private investigator she had once trusted for delicate matters, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I need you to find everything you can about a woman named Margaret and her daughter Lily," she whispered, "and I need to know how that necklace traveled from my home to hers." The man promised to begin immediately, and when she hung up, Eleanor sat back, her chest tight with fear and anticipation. She knew the truth was coming, and she was terrified of what it would mean, both for her and for the girl who had unknowingly stepped into her life carrying a piece of Eleanor's broken past. Eleanor waited for days that felt like years. She walked through the long halls of her mansion, each room filled with reminders of her past life with Charles, the grand portraits, the shelves of books, the expensive furniture. Everything reminded her of the man she had loved and trusted. But now every memory felt heavy. With doubt, her heart trembled whenever she thought of the name Margaret, and she could not rest until she had the answers. The private investigator she had hired promised to return quickly. But the waiting was torture. Eleanor could barely eat. She could barely sleep. She spent her nights sitting near the window, staring at the city lights, wondering if her entire marriage had been built on a truth she never knew. Finally, one evening, the phone rang. Eleanor's hand shook as she reached for it. The investigator's calm voice on the other end told her he had found information. They arranged to meet the next morning in his small office downtown. Eleanor hardly slept that night. She sat in silence, clutching one of Charles's old photographs, whispering to herself, "Why didn't you tell me? What did you hide from me?" The next morning, dressed in her usual elegance but with a face pale from worry, Eleanor entered the investigator's office. The man slid a folder across the desk toward her. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think you should prepare yourself. What I found is not simple." His voice was steady, but his eyes carried a trace of pity. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, and letters. The story unfolding before her eyes made her chest tighten until she could hardly breathe. The investigator spoke softly. "Margaret was not just any woman. She had a connection to your husband, Charles, many years ago, before you ever knew her name. They had been involved in a quiet relationship. It seems Charles cared deeply for her, more than anyone realized. The necklace you thought was stolen was never truly stolen. It was given by your husband himself." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wet with tears she could not hold back. She stared at a faded photograph of Charles, standing beside a younger Margaret, his hand on her shoulder, the same necklace shining at her throat. Her heart broke in that instant, the betrayal slicing through her like a knife. The investigator continued gently, "It appears Margaret and Charles shared a bond that lasted for some time. Though Charles remained with you, he provided for her quietly, kept her life comfortable, and when their time together ended, Margaret kept the necklace as a reminder. She never sold it, never gave it up. She wore it until the day she passed it on to her daughter." Eleanor shook her head slowly, her mind spinning. She whispered, "So all these years, I thought it was stolen. I thought it was gone, but it was with her, with the woman he—" Her voice cracked and she could not finish. Her tears fell silently onto the papers spread before her. The investigator placed another photograph on the table, this one of Lily as a child standing beside Margaret. The necklace glittering at her mother's neck. Eleanor stared at it, her body frozen. The truth weighed down on her. Charles had loved another. He had shared something sacred with another woman, and from that love had come a child who was now grown, a child who was Lily. Eleanor whispered through trembling lips, "She is my granddaughter." The words tasted foreign, shocking, yet undeniable. The blood connection was there. She could see it in Lily's eyes, the familiarity she had felt when looking at her. It all made sense now. Her chest ached with both anger and sorrow, anger that Charles had hidden this truth from her, sorrow that he had died before she could confront him, before she could ask why. She felt betrayed, but she also felt something else she did not expect, a strange pull toward Lily, an invisible bond that her heart could not deny. She realized the girl was not to blame. She was innocent. She had grown up with her own struggles, never knowing the full truth either, and now fate had brought them together. Through the necklace, through the love of a man who had lived two lives. Eleanor sat in silence for a long time after the investigator finished, her tears staining the papers. She finally whispered, "Thank you. This is not easy, but I needed to know." She left the office with the folder clutched tightly to her chest, her steps unsteady, her mind clouded with memories. She returned to her mansion, walking into the grand hall that once felt safe, now filled with shadows of secrets. She looked at Charles's portrait on the wall, his painted smile calm and confident, and, for the first time she whispered to it with bitterness, "How could you do this to me, to us?" That night, Eleanor sat at her dressing table, staring at her own reflection in the mirror, her face lined with age, her eyes red from tears. She picked up one of her pearl necklaces and held it in her hands, but it felt meaningless now. The only necklace that mattered was the one she no longer owned, the one that connected her not only to her husband but now to a granddaughter she had never known. She whispered to herself, "I cannot change the past, but maybe I can change the future." The truth had left her shaken, the truth had broken old illusions, but it had also opened a door. Eleanor realized she had a choice. She could walk away, bury the truth, and continue her life as if nothing had happened, or she could step forward, embrace Lily, and give her the family she never had. She did not know yet what she would say. She did not know how Lily would react. But deep inside, Eleanor knew she would not abandon her. Not now. Not after destiny had brought them together in such an unexpected way. The night grew darker outside, but inside Eleanor's heart, a new light began to flicker, small but steady. She had uncovered the painful truth. She had faced the betrayal. And now she stood at the edge of a new chapter, one that would test her strength, her forgiveness, and her ability to love beyond the wounds of the past. She whispered into the silence, "Tomorrow, I will see her again." And with that, she closed her eyes, letting her tears fall freely, knowing her life would never be the same. Again Eleanor woke the next morning with a heavy heart. The folder from the investigator still lay on her bedside table. The photographs, the letters, the documents, all of them screaming the same truth she had tried to deny. Lily was not just a stranger. She was family. She was blood. The granddaughter Eleanor never knew existed. The granddaughter her husband had kept hidden from her. The necklace that had once been the most precious symbol of her marriage had become the bridge to this shocking revelation. Eleanor sat up slowly, her hands trembling as she whispered to herself, "What do I do now? How do I tell her?" She dressed with care that morning, her mind torn between fear and determination. She chose a pale blue dress, the color Charles once loved, but today it felt like armor. She pinned her hair neatly and slipped on a soft scarf. She looked in the mirror and reminded herself that she was strong. She had faced loss, betrayal, and heartbreak. She could face this too. She could not undo the past, but she could decide what to do with the present. She whispered again, "She deserves to know the truth." When Eleanor arrived at the cafe where she had met Lily before, her heart pounded so hard she thought people could hear it. She chose the same quiet corner, ordered tea, and waited. The minutes dragged like hours. Every time the bell above the door rang she looked up, hoping it was Lily. Finally, the young waitress stepped in, still in her work uniform, her smile soft and genuine when she spotted Eleanor. She walked over, sitting down across from her. "It's nice to see you again," Lily said. Warmly, her innocence shining in her eyes, Eleanor forced a smile, though her chest ached. For a few moments, they spoke casually, about Lily's work, about the weather, about little things that filled the silence. But Eleanor's hands trembled on her teacup. She knew she couldn't hold back any longer. She placed her cup down and leaned forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Lily, there is something I must tell you, something that will change everything you know." Lily frowned slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "That necklace you wear, it was once mine, many years ago. It belonged to me. It was given to me by my husband on our wedding day." Lily's eyes widened in shock. Her hand immediately flew to the pendant at her chest. "Yours," she whispered. "But, my mother said," Eleanor interrupted gently, her voice trembling. "I know what she told you. I know she said it was hers, and in a way, she was right. But the truth is, your mother, Margaret, she once shared a bond with my husband, Charles. The necklace was not stolen. It was given to her by him. And, my dear, you are his granddaughter, which makes you my family." For a moment, silence filled the cafe, the air heavy. Lily's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes shimmered with disbelief, confusion, and fear. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, this can't be true. My mother never. She never said anything like that. She never told me." Eleanor reached across the table, taking Lily's trembling hand in her own, her eyes pleading. "She didn't tell you because it was painful, because she wanted to protect you. But the truth is here. I had it investigated. There are letters, photographs, proof. I would never come to you with lies. You are my granddaughter, Lily." Lily pulled her hand back slightly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "All my life I thought my mother's past was a mystery. I thought she kept it locked away because it hurt her. But I never imagined this. I never imagined she was connected to someone like you, to someone like him." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her hands. Eleanor's own tears fell as she reached out again, her voice soft but steady. "I understand this is a shock. I understand it feels impossible. But look at me. Look into my eyes. Can you not feel it? That connection. That bond. We are not strangers. We are family." Slowly, Lily lifted her head, her eyes swollen with tears. She stared at Eleanor, studying her face, the lines of age, the softness in her gaze, and for the first time she noticed something in the shape of Eleanor's eyes, something familiar, like a faint reflection of herself. Her chest rose and fell quickly as the truth sank deeper. Family. She whispered, testing the word, her voice fragile. Eleanor nodded, squeezing her hand. Yes, family, my dear. And I will not let you walk through life alone anymore. Not now that I've found you. The two women sat in silence for a long moment, their hearts heavy with pain but also trembling with the possibility of something new. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. I know this truth has broken your world, just as it has broken mine. But maybe from these broken pieces, we can build something stronger, together. Lily's tears fell silently, but she did not pull away this time. She let Eleanor hold her hand. She let herself feel the warmth of a bond she never knew she was missing. As they left the cafe together, the city around them moved as if nothing had changed, but for them, everything had. Eleanor felt the weight of betrayal still pressing on her. But alongside it was a new weight, the responsibility of love, of family, of making things right. Lily walked beside her, quiet, lost in thought. But she did not run. She did not turn away. She stayed, and that was enough for Eleanor to know that a door had been opened, one that could never again be closed. That night, Eleanor returned home exhausted but lighter than before. She stood in front of Charles's portrait once more, staring at his painted eyes. She whispered with both anger and forgiveness. You hid the truth from me, but I will not hide it any longer. I will love her as you should have. I will give her the place she deserves. And with that, she felt her heart release a little of the burden it carried. For the first time in many years, she did not feel entirely alone. The days after Eleanor told Lily the truth were unlike anything she had ever lived through. Her heart felt lighter because she no longer carried the secret alone. But it also felt heavy with fear. She knew the moment this story came out, nothing in her world would remain the same. People would talk, her family would be shocked, society would whisper. The name Whitmore would be on every lip again, not for wealth or charity, but for scandal. Yet Eleanor told herself she no longer cared. What mattered now was Lily, the young woman who had walked into her life wearing a necklace that tied the past and the present together in ways no one could have imagined. Eleanor invited Lily to her mansion one quiet afternoon. She wanted her to see the life she had once shared with Charles, the history, the legacy, and also the emptiness she had lived with since his passing. When Lily stepped through the grand doors, her eyes widened. The tall ceilings, the chandeliers, the paintings, everything seemed like a world from a dream. She touched the polished banister with her fingers, whispering softly. I never thought I'd stand in a place like this. Eleanor smiled faintly, her heart aching as she replied. And yet, my dear, you belong here more than you know. They walked through the halls together, Eleanor showing her photographs of Charles, pointing out memories, telling stories of the man who had been both her greatest love and her deepest wound. Lily listened quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes asking small questions, but mostly letting the reality sink in. Finally, they stopped in front of a large painting of Charles, his face proud, his eyes confident. Lily stared at it for a long time, then whispered, So this is my grandfather. The words felt strange to her, heavy, but also filled with a sense of connection she had never known. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering, Yes, and though he is gone, his blood runs through you, his spirit lives in you. The truth did not stay between them for long. News spread quickly, first among Eleanor's close circle, then across the family, and finally into the public. Whispers turned into gasps, articles appeared in society papers. Billionaire widow finds secret granddaughter. The headlines screamed, friends called in disbelief. Relatives gathered with questions and judgment. Some embraced the revelation with curiosity, others recoiled with anger. Her children, Charles's legitimate heirs, were stunned. Some accused Eleanor of dictionarying his memory, others quietly admitted they had always sensed he kept secrets. The house was filled with arguments, voices rising, tears falling. The family fractured under the weight of a truth no one expected. Through it all, Eleanor stood firm. Her age had given her a strength that no storm could take away. She looked her children in the eyes and told them, She is one of us. Whether you accept her or not, I will not turn her away. Her voice was calm but unshakable. Some stormed out, others fell into silence. But Eleanor remained steady. She had made her choice. She would not abandon Lily, not when destiny had given her a second chance at family. Lily herself struggled with the sudden change. One day she was a simple waitress working for tips. The next she was thrust into the world of wealth, attention, and judgment. Reporters wanted her story, neighbors whispered behind her back, her co-workers stared at her with both envy and disbelief. At night she cried quietly, afraid she did not belong, afraid she would never truly fit in. But each time, Eleanor reminded her, "You are not here because of money. You are here because you are family." And nothing can change that. Slowly, those words began to heal Lily's doubts. The necklace, once a symbol of love and betrayal, now became something new. Eleanor and Lily sat together one evening. The sapphire pendant resting between them on the table, Eleanor's wrinkled hand touched it gently. "This necklace once broke me. It was stolen from me, given away without my knowledge, but now, in your hands, it has become a gift again, not of betrayal, but of connection. It has led me to you, and for that, I no longer hate it. I cherish it." Lily's eyes filled with tears. She held the necklace tightly, whispering, "I will never take it off. Not now, not ever." As weeks turned into months, the shock that once shook everyone began to settle. People slowly grew used to the idea. Society always found new scandals to whisper about. And though some relatives remained distant, others warmed to Lily. They began to see her kindness, her humility, her genuine heart. Eleanor introduced her at charity events, not as a stranger, not as a guest, but as her granddaughter. People stared at first, but Eleanor's dignity silenced the room. She carried herself with the same elegance as always, only now with Lily by her side. And together they showed the world that family is not always simple, but it is always powerful. Eleanor often sat in her garden now, watching Lily laugh with the flowers in her hair, sometimes helping with charity plans, sometimes just reading quietly, and each time Eleanor's heart swelled with both pride and sorrow. Pride for the young woman she had found, sorrow for the years they had lost. But she told herself it was not too late. Life had given her a gift, and she would spend the rest of her days making up for the time gone. She whispered to the wind, to Charles, "You may have kept her hidden from me, but I will not hide her from the world. I will love her as I should." The world around them continued to move. People still whispered, some still judged, but Eleanor no longer cared. She had found truth in the most unexpected way, through a necklace that carried more than gold and gems. It carried love, loss, betrayal, and reunion. It carried destiny, and it had brought her to the granddaughter she never knew she had. The truth had shocked everyone. But from that shock came something stronger, something real, a bond that could not be broken. Eleanor and Lily sat together one evening as the sun set, painting the sky in gold and pink. Eleanor leaned close and whispered, "The nation may have been stunned, but I am simply grateful, because I thought I had lost everything, and now I have found you." Lily smiled softly, resting her head on Eleanor's shoulder, and in that quiet moment, both women knew their lives would never be the same again. The pain of the past was real, but so was the love of the present, and together, they would carry it forward, as grandmother and granddaughter, as family, forever bound by truth.